with producers Michael Schanberg, Stacy Scher, writer Helen Childress, director Ben Stiller, and moderating the discussion, thank you for coming, the carpetbagger and culture reporter on movies, music, and art for the New York Times, Melina Reisig. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So we're going to have time for some of your questions, but to start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about setting and time. Watching this, it's so clear that it captures a certain moment. But were you guys aware that you were doing that? Was that an intention? Anybody can answer that.
Is this on? Yeah. I produced The Big Chill, which was very specific about that generation. And when I met Helen, I asked her questions about her generation. It's extremely, almost to some degree, painfully self-conscious about the time in a way that I don't think you have to do now if you're doing a similar movie because of the internet and so much of this has been usurped by television. But it was meant to be about the time, very specifically.
So did you guys feel a lot of pressure in capturing all of those little details? I mean, from the production design on up, everything had to be perfect because even before the internet, you were up. You know, people would make fun of you if you got it wrong.
That was really important to us. Ironically, things that, like, Michael had to fly to San Francisco to talk to the chairman of the Gap, to talk them into letting us shoot in an actual Gap store, something that we get money to do today. So, I mean, it was a very different time. The whole notion of selling out is kind of gone. I think, you know, Melina would have happily embraced Michael Grace after she saw the documentary.
Or she'd be on YouTube.
I think Michael and Stacy carried the burden of that more than Ben and I did in some ways because the pressure to actually write a story about characters, you know, I don't think we could have thought in terms of like, okay, is this Gen X enough? Or, you know, while you're trying to write an actual story about people. So a lot of times that was, Michael and Stacy really had an eye out for that, and Ben just had a natural talent for it, like from his show too. Just capturing the world of television, the world, you know, not from the media and that kind of thing.
Right, it's kind of inescapable now to see it that we realize, you know, almost 20 years later that if we made this movie today, it would turn out very differently. Is that what you were thinking, Ben, when you watched it?
I'm just still trying to come to grips with the size of my hair.
And your cell phone.
Yeah. Wow. Sorry, it's just like, it's very, I apologize. I just want to apologize for every mistake I made up there. It's really weird to see a movie. I haven't seen it for probably, I think, that long. So I've seen parts of it, but to watch it and with an audience, which was really just a unique experience. But it's really...
We want to thank you because you're the first audience who got the bell jar joke, I think.
Well, you were a first-time feature filmmaker, the first project, and you are feeling now like you can see that.
Well, I think any filmmaker, if you look at something you've done, with more time you have from it, it just gives you a totally different perspective. So I look at certain choices. It's really interesting to see the stuff that, you know, that makes me cringe, and the stuff that doesn't make you cringe. And it's just a very strange thing. You know, I feel that it's, I don't know, it's very interesting.
Did you ever think of putting yourself in Ethan Hawke's character?
No. That was never an option. No, I mean, I was invited to come on board by Jersey Films because they've been developing the movie with Helen, and she was writing about a lot of personal experiences, and Troy was, you know, a really specific type, and my character really sort of developed as we started to talk about the movie, and I tried to figure out a way to get a part in the film. I was trying to figure out a way to connect the movie as a director, and we started talking about the points of view that the characters had, and her, you know, a lot of it being very personal, and I was coming sort of more from my point of view, and I felt like it was important to have a character in there that sort of represented another side of of that generation, you know, is a few years older, and that would help sort of the story. But so that's how Michael character sort of came to be.
Yeah, that role was always kind of the weak link when we developed it, and then when Ben came on, we did a sort of a retro scripting process where he and I improv'd out the scenes, and he really kind of invented that character, and a lot of the dialogue you hear Michael say is actually, that was what Ben said, and we just still have the cassettes. We improv'd it out, and then I would go in and script it, and I think that's what made the movie come alive.
Ben had this great insight because Michael's character was in his 30s, so he was like this 30-something, 20-somethings, which was really more obvious. And Ben just said, make it a fair fight, make him of their generation, but a person who has real aspirations and different motivations. It really transformed the movie.
And when we tested it, some of the audience was upset that she didn't end up with his character.
Did you shoot a version like that?
No, we never shot that version. But it was a strange thing because it was a studio movie that was being made about, you know, the idea of this commodification of dissent or whatever, and you know, the idea that it was a Universal movie that really was sort of independent-minded was always something that I think we struggled with. So we were really concerned about. Remember, you want to tell that story about the Berkeley screening?
We screened it first at a test screening in Palm Springs because the Universal executives were having a retreat, and we didn't think they were sophisticated enough, so we decided we'd screen it in Berkeley where the audience would get it.
Well, it's all because of that bell jar joke.
Yeah.
Ben and I became obsessed with the fact that the audience was just not sophisticated enough in Palm Springs to get the bell jar joke. And
So we wanted to go and find our audience.
there were geniuses about this. We thought Berkeley, there are people.
And the scores would be great. Well, everybody in Berkeley turned out to be a film critic. And on the cards, you get these long critical analysis of what they didn't like about it. So screw that.
And the bell jar joke.
Well, it was worse than that. When the Universal logo came up, they booed.
In the focus group, somebody actually said you violated the rules of decoupage editing in the big gulp scene. It was not one of mine and Ben's better instincts.
No one gives notes like that anymore, I don't think. I think we should.
Done with decoupage.
It was the last film. Did we cut on film?
Yes, we did come.
It was the last film, yeah.
Yeah. Cold War.
Why don't we open it up to the audience for questions? I think there are some mics that are going to be around, but if you just want to raise your hands and I'll call on you that way.
Just Ben, since you opened it up, you were saying some of the things that made you cringe and some that you still liked. Would you give us such as?
Yeah, sure. It's just a strange thing to. I mean, we premiered the movie here in this theater 18 years ago. So that was So then I think I was cringing at different things. But you know, you're so close. Yeah, you're so close to it. So I guess looking back, seeing the moments that play, and that, you know, it's interesting to see moments that I feel are like real moments that play just as well, or you know, still play well. And then I see places where I feel like I sort of underlined it too much and felt like I had to sort of dot the I a little too much, across the T too much, and you know, underline it for the audience. So. Trying to think of another alphabetical metaphor. But you know, so you know, certain close-ups or music cues where I feel like, oh, I could have just let that be, or I could have let it play out in the end. Even, you know, like even the end, maybe that last shot, you know, when they come together, a really pretty shot. You know, that wide shot, I could just maybe just let it end right there. You know, things like that, or that close-up when I say like, I know what she needs, and when you know. I kind of wanted to leave the theater at that moment.
That's
But it's
awesome.
interesting, you know, it's just interesting, it's just certain, but it's certain things you go, oh, I could have just let that be, because the moments where I see like Janine really laughing, those moments where that are real, I feel like those are still just as fresh as you know, when we first made the movie. And, you know, but that's just the benefit of time, really, that you never have in a movie, I think, when you're in it and who you are at the time when you make the movie. And, but overall, it's really a good feeling to see it, and aside from just being present and seeing Asian dance.
Was there a lot of improvisation on set?
There was not that much, was there? Not really. I mean, a lot of it came into rehearsal, and
And we
yeah.
scripted it.
Yeah, and then we just all hung out together a lot, and I knew Janine and Steve.
Even Ethan.
Ethan were friends, right? And Winona knew Ethan, and so it was just sort of everybody. We all felt like we were equals and sort of, you know, hanging out. And when you're directing and acting, you have to sort of have that camaraderie with the actors because it's a different process because you're in it, and you really need the support of the other actors.
And you knew Susie and
Susie and John Mahoney, yeah, because we done a play, yeah. So, and my friend Harry O'Reilly, who plays Susie's husband,
And your mom.
and my mom, and Andy Dick,
Oh, Ben,
my close friend.
Was there a sense though, as you were making this, that it was sort of a ragtag group of youth taking on a big cultural thing?
Well, I think when you guys were starting when you had the idea for the movie, you wanted to do something, right, that sort of identified with at that moment in time, right?
Yeah, we wanted to go important in time, but what he said, Ben said earlier, it always comes down to character and story. You can't really have people spout off stuff. So it's a zeitgeist comedy, it's a social comedy, and I think we all grew up on, say, Mazursky films or some middle Woody Allen films that were really specific to the times they lived in and yet told individual stories. And you don't see that much anymore in film. I think television does some of it.
Yeah, I mean, all the television stuff, I think you know when you're putting television commercials in a movie, you know they're going to date the movie, but you sort of do that intentionally. You know, I just watched Being There again recently. There's so much TV, and all of those. It's so great to see like all those commercials and shows, because the older they get, and the more dated they get, the more interesting it is to sort of look at what we watched at that time. So I think it's kind of cool to have that stuff in the movie.
I think in some ways the film was really personal, script-wise, but also it's almost like a document about the process of making it, in a sense, like just how we were all together, and Stacy and I were friends, and I was living at Stacy's house with her for a while, and we were kind of all just bouncing around, and that's why there were cringe-worthy moments for me as well. But then I think, well, you know, I was 20 when I started writing it, I was 23 when it got made, and that's what gives it a certain kind of honesty, and a lot of the artifice in it comes from, I just wasn't a good enough writer yet, or a sophisticated enough writer yet to sort of cover my tracks. Like, I know what she needs. I mean, like, I know, I'm sorry.
No, you're right. And I filmed that too. And I said, yes, that's the take. Print it. I embraced it wholeheartedly. But you know, that is the other side of it, I think, too, is when I look at it, that there's a certain lack of cynicism in the movie that I was like, it really does sort of wear its heart on its sleeve. And
That's what keeps it.
that's what's interesting to see, you know, that, oh, we really just were putting it out there in that way.
Look, before the wonderful people at Universal took us on, I believe that the three of us went on a scout paid for by the state of Texas and stayed in like some Best Western to scout because we were going to make the movie for $4 million. And then we got the call that Winona was in because we thought you were going to go off and go back to the show or do something. And
Got canceled.
so,
Had no other option.
and then, you know, Universal stepped in, and so it was this sort of very independent studio film. It was an odd mix, but we were ready to do, I mean, we didn't shoot in that many days. It
I think it was 42.
yeah.
And a small note, but in the beginning when Ethan Hawke gets the phone number from the girl who he slept with, that's when his elder.
So I want to go back to the idea of cynicism and the fact that the movie does wear its heart in its sleeve, which is really interesting because when it came out, the buzz about it, the way it was received in the marketplace was that it was portraying young adults as being very cynical and approaching life with this sense of irony. But then when you watch the movie now, it is not nearly as ironic as the culture has become.
Yes, yeah, I found it interesting too, that everybody's sort of very much, I mean, just that, it's this love story, it's sort of very traditional love story.
I mean, if you watch Jon Stewart, the news is not ironic. So the whole culture is, at that time, was more specific to the generation.
I think that's what I like to see in movies, if there's something that you're able, even if it's couched in irony, that there's something heartfelt and real there. I think it's what people, why go to the movies, want to feel something. So, I mean, that's always like an inner sort of struggle that I had. Just because you don't want to be cheesy, which I felt like sometimes I go, oh, I'm cheesy side. But it's interesting that it actually aired that way more than the other one.
Right, and it wasn't, nobody realized that at the moment.
I didn't.
Let's turn it back to the audience here for some more questions.
When you guys can you hear? Okay. When you guys began the process, did you have these actors in mind to play the characters, or any of the actors in mind? Just Ben Stiller.
Yeah.
Ben Stiller in mind.
Yeah, and then we. I mean, you had me in mind? No, you didn't have me in mind.
You had you in mind. No, we turned it down before. Once you came on board and the character was reconceived, we all said you had to play the part. And ironically, the harder thing in hindsight was, remember the one meeting with the studio head who shall remain nameless, who had no problems with you being a first-time director, but only wanted to know why we weren't going to talk about other people for the part. No, we only wanted you to play the part. And Winona came on board and was sort of our little, she got the movie greenlit. And
she really embraced the movie. I mean, she read it and loved it, and she's the reason why the movie got made, really.
She suggested Ethan. Yeah, it was the first contemporary. She had just done Age of Innocence, right? Or something.
And the other one with Rest Street, the house of, I can't remember it, but yeah, she just wanted to.
She wanted to play a contemporary character and her age.
She liked these down to earth.
And Ethan suggested Steve Zahn. We all went to go see a theater performance, Mark Sherman's play, Sophistry, and saw Steve in the play and then gave him the part. But yeah, that's...
Yeah, and then we just auditioned a lot of people, and I didn't work with Janine.
Yeah, and asked for a lot of favors.
Making a movie like that, even in the studio system, wasn't much different than it is making a movie today. Now you're trying to get favors from your friends, actors, you get the financing. What's different now is I think it's the studios don't finance these type of films directly. They're financed independently. They come to Sundance and they find a buyer. But that's somehow the business has changed. The movies are still being made.
I can think of another thing that makes me cringe.
Bring it.
For some reason, I decided that it would be perpetually dusk all the time.
That's just the time that you go finish lighting every day. The movie's beautiful, though. Emmanuel Lubezki did an incredible job.
But it is dusty a lot.
That works for me. I think we referred to it as romantic realism at the time.
And then there was the scene where they kissed by the fountain, that because the fountain was so loud, we had to loop the entire scene, and I really regret that.
I think also a difference about why.
I mean, if I was an actor, that would have killed me, because seriously, I made them loop that entire scene, which was like this big scene that was emotional, which is really hard for an actor to do. To have to go in and do all your lines again, and it never sounds real and it never sounds as good, and you never can get the performance as good. So
I actually remember how hard that was on the mixing stage.
So and also you have the waterfall in the background. So I'd like to go back and reshoot that.
So now you've got public apologies. I'm sure it's cool. Anybody else? Over here.
I'm most curious about is the integration of the documentary footage with traditionally shot camera footage. What was the thought process on that, and when did you choose when to insert pieces where and why?
Well, I mean, the whole sort of, core of the story is this documentary that she's making about her friends, and that's the interesting thing that I think really, dates the movie in terms of where we are now. That you said YouTube, it's really true. This movie, the whole story wouldn't exist now because if she wanted to make a documentary about her friends, she'd just make a documentary about her friends, and she would, post it and edit it on her computer and let people discover it and not have anything. It's changed so much. So at that time, the idea of access to media, you couldn't go through the computer, and you couldn't just, it was less direct, and filmmaking tools were less available. So that was an important part of the movie, was her home video footage, and we just wanted it to look, like real video, so we shot on real video.
We shot on a beta because I think the high def video had just come out and it looked too good. It just looked like poorly lit film.
Right.
We actually vented a lot of tests.
And yeah, I mean, there was no DI happening at that time, digital intermediate, so you couldn't, I just saw this great documentary making of Jaws where they talked about how they would spend half a day waiting for a boat to leave the horizon because they couldn't take it out digitally, and it's a real thing. And so that's changed the process so much in terms of everything and how that would look and all of it. So we had to be much more aware of that, like how the video transferred to film, and had to do the test and print it out to film to see what it would look like. Because all the optical effects are actual optical effects, they're not done on a computer, like dissolves and things like that. And I feel really lucky that I had a chance to edit a movie on film, because it's literally at the very end of when people were being really allowed to do that. And it just changes the process. And if I can make another Steven Spielberg reference, he once said that he liked editing on film, even when he could edit digitally, because the time that it took for the editor, first of all, to think about making the cut, because the editor had to literally go and cut the film and splice it together and find the little short end piece that they took out before. It would take like 10 or 15 minutes to try and edit of a certain scene. And he said he liked that amount of time because it gave him time to think about it, and you think about it more before you actually make the cut. And that process is totally gone now because you just do it instantaneously.
Right, there's a reason quick cuts.
Yeah, yeah.
After.
And even now, look at the pace of this movie. The pace of this movie, feels a slower pace than doing something less.
Not just editing, but remember printing takes? Remember the day where they were like, Ben, you're printing too many takes?
Yes, because you have to choose which takes you want to actually print to look at. And they get mad if you print too much because then it costs more to film. And now that doesn't exist.
I think you guys think you're selling.
What's that?
Quentin still shoots on film.
Does it? Well, yeah, it shoots on film, but...
Prince, Daly's watch Daly's.
Oh, watch Daily film. Police Quentin Tarantino.
I guess the last Daily trailer of Hollywood.
It's still the 90s for me.
Oh, I think you guys are selling yourself short, and Ben, I think anyway you are, because it's true that the movie wouldn't necessarily be made the same way now because she would just put her thing on YouTube, but it also prefigured the whole idea of people in their 20s wanting to document everything, the most mundane things about their lives, which we see, daily now on Facebook. So
Yeah, people find their lives fascinating.
We all just found Helen's life fascinating.
I think, one of the major differences I have to say that as far as a movie like this getting made today is a movie with a female protagonist, and that's, with the exception of something like Bridesmaids, you don't really see that many, lamentably, you don't see that many movies today getting made about women or women's issues. And there were scenes that got cut, weren't there? Wasn't there a scene where they were getting petition, signatures? There's a couple of, I don't know, they were in front of the, mean, I'm proud of that, you know, that we made a film happen, you know, with a female protagonist that wasn't, you know, it wasn't a gross out film, and it wasn't, you know, I wouldn't put it in necessarily, you know, it wasn't a total chick flick. Maybe it is.
I think that one of the things that's really commendable about this movie is that she has ambition that's outside of romantic ambition. I mean, she really wants to have a career and be a professional and change the world, and that's certainly something that you don't see a lot in movies about women. So I think that's something that we should all applaud, and somebody try and make more movies like that, please. Anybody else have a question about you?
I did a little research after watching it, like 10 years after it got made, and I was really surprised because Helen, the trivia says Helen finished writing when she was still freshman in college, and I was really surprised because I was a freshman in college when I was writing the movie. So is that true? Or?
Oh no, I was 20. I was actually in college when I met Michael, and he had the idea to.
Helen had written a really good spec script called Blue Bayou, and it was off of that writing sample that we got. In college, you're a screenwriter?
Oh, I'm still student.
Well, the great thing about writing or even filmmaking today is you can use the smallest camera and, you know, the computer's free, and you can start making films now.
How did you have the guts to write something like this at that age?
Oh, I didn't really. I mean, Michael really had honestly had the vision for it, and honestly, Stacey had the know-how and the skills. I don't think I was that incredibly talented. I was just, you know, I had a lot of raw material. I mean, I was only 20, and then honestly, it got really funny when Ben came on, and sort of, you know, I just through doing the improvs with him, it was like going to the groundlings or something. Like I sort of learned about comic timing, and it made me rethink the other scenes in the movies, and it just suddenly, the bar kept getting, I mean, I think I stood on a lot of shoulders to get that made. So it
But you were willing to take a lot of your own life.
I didn't know better. I was just like, I had no dignity. You know, I really didn't know that anyone would be upset or sue me or anything would happen or that my mother would mind that I mocked her. Oh, it's really, I don't recommend going down that way, but in a way it gives it a certain authenticity, but I don't know.
I think a week before shooting, we suggested we change the names of the parents from here on.
And my dad gave me his gas card, and he actually did take it back after the movie.
However, I'm the one who ran up the tab. It took money from other people on the gas card I had.
Yeah, so it wasn't it necessarily that. It was a lot of people getting in and teaching me how to take, you know, make art, take your own experience and arrange it in a certain way and make it funny and make it deep. And you know, Ben also knows a lot about drama, although he's not known for that as much, but he has a very dramatic side as well, which I like.
We saw it in those close-ups.
No, it's like reds. Where they're kissing, it's like reds at the train station. I thought it was beautiful.
Also, the great thing, Ben, about your direction in this film, I just was really blown away by your composition. And then the other thing that's so subtle and funny, the way that you take the edge off of the sentimentality. Like when Michael and Elena kissed for the first time and the big gulps were there, that could have been such a corny scene, but because of the big gulps and the choreography and the way you staged it, it's funny and charming. That was really fun for me to watch all these years later. So I haven't seen it since we saw it here 18 years ago, all the way through.
I think we have time for one more. Ben, you want to say something?
I was just going to say 18 years. It's weird. It's just weird.
What was it like for you?